job cultures. Thank you so much for your patience today. I am Dr. Julie Pham, the CEO of Curiosity Based, and today I am joined by Zane Fitch, who is the co-founder of Dayspring Fitch, Seattle's only African American owned funeral home that is left. And Zane and I have met. Gosh, Zane, has it been 2009? I think that's when we
Right,
first met,
in
right?
2009 when we went through
Yeah,
the Chase program at Chase
yeah.
Bank. Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah,
So
so longtime friends and
mhm.
co-volunteers in the community together. So, Zane, I'm super excited to get this conversation, to have this conversation with you because I think that there's a lot of intrigue and mystery around, what do funeral home directors do? So first, actually, I know that there's lots of certifications that are involved in this, and so if you could, we're going to just flash some of the certificates that you sent over, so you can explain what is this.
This is the International Conference of Funeral Service Examining Boards, which qualifies me to practice funeral service, the arts of funeral service, pretty much anywhere on the globe. And so it can be used in a number of countries. And so the certifications are good in Canada, Trinidad, or any other place that I can think of that I would be practicing funeral service.
What about this one? Any
That
of
one
these other
is
ones you
the
want to
one.
comment on? Mhm,
Well,
mhm.
okay. The one from the Texas State Board of Morticians is the second funeral home I worked for after college, and that was from this Texas State Board, which my license is now active in Texas, and that's the one where I worked for the gentleman whose signature is on the right, one H. Victor Baker, who was the son of the founder of Baker Funeral Home in Fort Worth, Texas.
Hmm. So, Zane, how'd you get into the funeral home business? I mean, from what I remember, you said you were trailing around the funeral home director when you were 10 years old in Denton,
That's
Texas, right?
true.
How'd you
In
get into
Denton, Texas.
this?
How that happened was that, my uncle owned a barbershop, and you may or may not know, but the barbershop is the Black community's country club. And so each Saturday I would go there to try to make money, sweeping the hair up and also doing shoe shines at my uncle's barbershop. And there was a gentleman there named Mr. Noble who quietly and loudly asked me each week, what was I going to be? And
Mm,
so I didn't know up until meeting him that I had to come up with an occupation, but it was pretty interesting and inspiring. And so my uncle, who was raising me, wanted me to become a medical doctor. My grandmother, who I was living with, she wanted me to become a minister preacher. And then um, I met the undertaker in the town, and the first thing he said was that, I want you to know your family dies and has deaths like everybody else. And so, he reminded me of that. But at the same time, he allowed me to start helping him set up in the church when there was a funeral. And, first time I got a quarter, 50 cents, but when he gave me $1, I knew I was on to something. Because $1 at that time would have bought 4 sandwiches, believe it or not. And so, anyway, that's where we were, and that's how I got started in the funeral home business.
so you were invited to basically intern to
That's
to
right.
help.
Start working. You bet.
What did your family think about you doing that?
They thought a little that it was a little different, but they all knew the town undertaker, whose name was Zay Jones, and Mr. Jones. Everybody knew him in the town. He was popular. He walked everywhere he went in the town. Of course, the town was only a mile long, so. But yeah, he walked everywhere, and he walked from the square, which is where my uncle's shoe shop was located. I had three uncles upon arriving in Denton, Texas. One had a shoe shop with the name Logan's Shoe Repair, still sits there today. And then, of course, there was the Logan's Barbershop, which is back in Southeast Denton across the tracks. And then, of course, my uncle Lloyd, who was just an entrepreneur in a number of ventures in the town.
Mm, mm. And so from what I understand in the beginning, you're kind of learning about the technical parts of the trade, and yet over time, you learned how you're supposed to communicate and how to build relationships.
Well, that's
So how
true.
did yeah,
That's
how did you learn that?
a high school counselor introduced me. I attempted to go into mechanics in high school, And what happened was that I was in Mr. Sullivan's automotive class, and I changed the oil in the car without putting the oil in. And Mr. Sullivan said, you'd be good in business, so I'm sending you over to DECA, which is Distributive Education Careers of America. And I got involved there. And one of the counselors arranged for me to take a successful funeral home director out for dinner, in which it was a 3 to 5 course meal, beginning with, a little tea and conversation, and then later into the entree of bread and some other things. But Mr. Temple was his name, Earl M. Temple. He had a funeral home in Oklahoma City. That's where we were living at the time. And he said, I like you. I can't leave you my funeral home because that's going to go to my son, but I can help you get started in funeral service. And that was a major thing because the whole reason for taking him out to dinner was to see if he liked me, then he would help me get started in funeral service. And that's what happened as a result of the prime rib dinner at Jamil's Steakhouse on Lincoln Boulevard in Oklahoma City.
Wow. So that was the first meal that you had a business expense too, it sounds like.
Well, yeah, the Chamber of Commerce, believe it or not, Chamber of Commerce picked up the price of the meal. So yeah, I'm thankful.
So you went from being a 10-year-old in Denton, Texas, helping out
to being 15, 16, starting with Mr. Temple. And then between that time, I had taken a few courses or tests on what I would need in college. And it was determined that I would need to take more courses in math and science. And so I joined a Saturday education program at the local college to take courses under what is called Upward Bound in my high school. And from there, from the Upward Bound program, I was able to go ahead and leave and go in the military, and then later enter college in Oklahoma City or University of Central Oklahoma in Oklahoma as well.
But you knew before you went into the military that you were going to come back and do this.
Oh yes, yeah. I knew that would be my thing to do in life. I actually mortuary science was given or studied on a VOTEC educational level, which is really some post high school training. I attempted to do that, but my mother insisted that I get a Bachelor of Science degree, which she called a sheepskin at that time.
And so in the beginning, you're 10 to 15 years old doing this, and then you realize, oh, you want to do this as a business. I'm really interested in how did you watch Zay Jones interact with families? What did you learn? What did you learn about that communication and relationship building part of it?
The biggest impact that Zay Jones made on me, and probably more of Mr. Temple, was that everyone in the community knew Mr. Temple. They endeared him. He had a lot of friends. Everyone thought a lot about the service he provided there in the community. And so everywhere he would go, people would greet him as being Mr. Temple, and that he was the funeral home director, and that, he was very successful. And I looked at that as a part that in the Black community, you often looking at who is the leader. And so I compared the funeral home man with the preacher. And I will admit that the undertaker had a Cadillac with leather seats, and the preacher had a Chevrolet with cloth seats. So I made that distinction of those two there, and made my decision. My grandmother and others had said that the funeral home man was still in the caskets after every funeral. So I followed Zay Jones for 3 days, and I told my grandmother after the third day, I said, Grandma, I guess he got enough money after the funeral because he hasn't gone back to dig any caskets up. So, but I believed him at first. I didn't know, and I wanted to know, and I checked it out. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say is you could see a lot of respect being paid to Mr. Temple, to Mr. Jones.
Right.
How did they interact with the community? How did they communicate and talk in a way that modeled for you, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do?
Right. Well, actually, by me seeing them, let me know that I could one day not only do the job, but be in a position. And in fact, I encountered a question about that because at that time, um, the funeral home business has always been somewhat separate. Something like church. They say the most segregated hour in America is 11 o'clock for the church service. And probably the funeral home business is similar to that, in that, when a death would occur, the state patrol would say, well, we've got the Negro funeral home over here, and then we've got, the white funeral home. And of course, he would make referrals to the different funeral homes based on their background. And that consistently went on for a long time. So in the community, people knew that they could rely on Temple Funeral Home, that
Mhm.
it was a viable concern. It was on a major street. Mr. Temple was also a veteran of the Navy, and he used his Navy educational benefits to enter school and then go on into the business. And I just looked at it and said I could probably do the same thing, and pursue that, and it happened.
Mm, mm. And so I'm really interested in, how did you learn how to essentially talk to your customers? And was there anything that Mr. Temple said, "Hey, no, you don't say that," or "This is what you say," or "This is how you treat people"? Like, what were those, and
Mr. Temple
how do
was
you
a
learn how to
man of
interact in a
he
way
was a
that's
man of
sensitive and
he was a man of being very sensitive to things in the community. So he helped with, whether it be food drives or education programs. He even took a day each week and gave bread out in the Black community and to poor people. And he did that on a regular basis. I saw that. And he'd have this one big station wagon where he'd go out and just give bread away each week. But everybody that I looked at as a kid, if they were able to give back, that means they had more.
Mm.
So because of him having more, he felt it was his position. I hope to have gotten to be at that level. I can remember when we used to give away turkeys and all kinds of things to people in need over the years, whether it be in my church or in the community as well.
So then there's also this layer of also just being generous with what you have
That's
too,
true.
in terms of the
That's true.
giving,
That's
in
true.
terms of that, relationship building part. Did you sense that people treat you differently because you are a funeral director? I mean, are people scared of you, or how they're yeah, how is that?
I think there's always been that little difference of there, that people fear people in the funeral business. I'll admit that when I first entered college, I would, girls would ask what's your major, and I would say mortuary science, and they would be pretty standoffish. And then next semester, I changed my major to life sciences, and I seem to have gotten a little carried away with too much time away from my studies. So I changed my major back to science, and pursue to go ahead and stay with my program. But it's very interesting that you would ask that, because I think we have all in society always had a fear of death, fear of some of the people who were in funeral service, and they were known as the undertaker, the mortician, the funeral man. These are all names that I knew I would have during my lifetime. And I became comfortable with them, in that I felt there was somewhat of a distinct aura behind all that. Somebody asked me, they interviewed me in maybe junior high school, and they said, what's the difference between the average person or a person walking down the street and Mr. Jones? And I said, well, even the police respects. So I liked that, and I looked at it, and I pursued it, and it happened.
Mm. And then how do you develop I mean, you knew you wanted to do this at a pretty young age.
Mhm.
For other people who were in this field of study, did they know it at such a young age? Was this pretty unusual for you to know this at age 14, 15, that you wanted to do this?
My grandfather died at about 53, 54 years old. And so in my mind, I figured I had to become famous early so that
Mm.
I could enjoy my notoriety for some time before my death. I think sometimes we look at our lives based on our family. And so my grandfather dies 6 years before I'm born. And so most of my life was spent going to see his grave. And,
Mhm.
and of course he had these sons, and of course my aunts. And But on one occasion, I can remember talking to my grandmother, and I said, "Grandmother, um, on today I met some very, very powerful men." And she said, "Who are they, boy?" And I mentioned that they were my uncle. She says, "Oh, I tell them when to hop, how high." So they were her sons.
Mhm.
And I think we get a lot of power from family, starting with my grandmother, who carried the family from the early years after my grandfather's death up until the time that we had made the transition from being, somewhat of maybe average family to doing better, from maybe um, a lower middle class to maybe a higher class. My uncle, who had the business, had done well. I can remember my other uncle, who was a little older. His name was Leonard Logan, and at one time, I can remember him having the barbershop, um, the restaurant. Um, and also he worked at the bank as a bank officer. And his job at the bank was to train young bankers on becoming, bankers. And
Mhm,
so he
mhm.
would decide who they would date, what clubs they would join. He was the chairman of of the Republican Party at a very young age. He was in the Marines as well and came back. And he was actually discharged from the Marines because he had too many children. He had 5 children at about the age of 22 or 23 years old. So the Marines discharged him on what is called the convenience of the government to prevent them from having a liability of taking care of all these kids.
Oh,
And
wow.
because Marines are often face death more than some of the other service groups,
Mm.
and that's the probability of them dying while on duty is high. And he was in during World War II, and so that was my uncle Leonard. And in addition to him, my uncle, who I spent a lot of time with, who was in business, he would go to auctions. He would sell cars, all kinds of stuff, and of course, he sold shoes and repaired them. And he would be in doing the shoes for beauty contestants there. Denton, Texas, is the home of North Texas State University as well as Texas Women's University. And so, because of that, we were involved with either helping him get ready for another show or something he was doing while growing up.
Mm. Well, at Curiosity Base, one of the things we often talk about is how much our family and our personal experience influence how we think about respect and also how we think about success. And so I can definitely see how your family, your uncles, your grandmother have really, and even with the passing, the early death of your grandfather really influenced that.
Mhm.
So
Oh,
kind of, so going back uh, to being a funeral home director, do you, how do you communicate such sensitive end of life matters with people?
well, actually, people are always, I mean, we're thinking in the future all the time. And so, the minister at church would say, one day we will, be here for your funeral, and you should be prepared. And preparation from the minister's standpoint was having your soul ready to meet God. And people still have questions about that, but later on, it became matter of fact as to whether or not you were prepared financially. And that's where Mr. Temple stepped in and would say, uh, where did Mr. Wilson work? And what kind of work that he did? And what's his social security check like? That
Hmm.
would be a question Mr. Temple would have
Uh-huh.
for you about the family that you're about to see or talk to or meet up with. And of course, he wanted to know about the stability of the job. Is it a job that's seasonal, or is it a job that's reoccurring all the time? And
Uh-huh.
so he would have that question about the family, them coming together, them coming to the funeral home, all of that.
And then so that would help prepare you to
That
communicate.
that helped prepare me to understand where people were
Mm.
when we would meet with them about a death.
Mhm.
Where did the person work? What did they
Mm.
do? Did they work with their hands? And
Mhm.
those are the agrarian people.
Mhm.
They are, to me, many times easy to get along with. I'll give you an
Mm.
example of that. A few years ago, we had a Hispanic family in to make a funeral arrangements, and we hired an interpreter. And upon hiring the interpreter, after everything was over with, he and I got out in the parking lot. And he said, he points to the watermelon. He said, "You want a watermelon?" And I said, "Of course," and I grabbed one. So I was just telling someone the other day, on one hand, we have language barriers, but when I took my first job there in Seattle at Butterworths,
Mhm.
um, I asked them what would I do serving the ethnic community with the Japanese and Chinese, and so Art Susumi, he came over and he says, "Look, if they come and have a strain on their face, that means they need to use the bathroom."
Mhm.
Things like that. And so that's who I work with. My first job in Seattle, I was my supervisor was Art Susumi. He was a World War II veteran. His family was very much involved in the community in Seattle. And in fact, I told someone earlier today that Art came, his father died, and Art came to the funeral home with a sign on him the following day: "Boy, work for funeral." And so he went to work for the funeral home for 50 years. And he um, trained me in terms of working in Seattle with all the different ethnic groups.
Mm.
I give him a lot of credit because he took time to show me, how it goes and what happens in Seattle. I can remember the first time we went to have dinner uh, uh, at a funeral, and Art says, "Now today, they are going to serve sushi." Which I asked him, "Does that mean that's raw fish?" He said, "Yes." And he said, "Now you're not going to embarrass me or yourself today. You're going to eat the raw fish, Mr. Fitch. You're going to eat the raw fish." And I said, "You're right, Art. I'm going to eat whatever's served, just as you mentioned." And I did, and I'm still alive, but here we are.
Oh, wow. So it's also what I'm hearing is when you're interacting with families, it's to do what to do what they do so that you can make them comfortable, and also that it doesn't draw attention to you, right? Because
That's right. That's right.
it's not about, "Oh, Mr. Fitch needs to eat this or that." It's just,
Right. Hmm.
"Mm, I see." And then that was so it was really coming to Seattle where you really started to work outside the Black community and more with all of these different ethnicities
That's
then.
true. That's true. That's a very
Mm,
true statement. That's a
mhm,
clear statement on that one. Yes, ma'am.
mhm. And then it also sounds though when Mr. Temple was kind of training you and to be aware of what kind of work there was, would you say that there's the different kind of work, also maybe the different kind of class that people were in that also affected how you talked about those end of life matters too?
Actually, I I think most of it's centered around that's true, but also developing community connections meant talking with students,
Mm,
talking with persons who were in development. Many years ago, we had interview. I was interviewed by first graders at a Seattle school,
mhm.
and the the boys wanted to know what kind of car I drove, but the girls wanted to know, where do you live? How do you make
Mm,
it? Where's your family? Who
mm,
supports you? So, in our society, I will say that, the girls were looking longer term probably than the boys in the class, but they all asked me questions and I did my best to answer them. And making that outreach was something that I knew was important before I got to Seattle, and then continued it as I, entered Seattle market with
mm,
all of these different changes going on.
mm. So a funeral to me seems like such a production. You've got all of these different contractors and partners that you've got to be working on so that you can create this experience.
Mhm.
So how did you go about collaborating, building relationships, communicating with all of those different partners?
Staying in touch with them is the
Mm,
thing. Following up with them, find out where they are. Where are the flowers? If
mm,
the flowers are ready, when are they going to be delivered? Showing them where they need to be delivered, and then of course, um, each funeral home person is really trained to handle some flowers, some food, and a lot of people.
mm.
And so, because of that, I had experience with that, and knew that, understood it. Um, in fact, at the family reunion one year, um, someone asked, "Are you the one that does hair or food?" I said, "Well, honey, I do both." But anyway, I spoke to them, and in our family, there are a number of people. In fact, I just got back from Texas. Two of my cousins were in the barbecue business, and so they've had that business. Somebody's got the sauce and the hottest thing to go on there, and just different things. But all these things were right in that little community, also in Denton, Texas.
So you have been doing this for over 50 years.
That's true. I got started at Temple Funeral Home in 1972. He actually hired three young teenagers at the same time, myself, James Thomason, and then David Shelton. And of course, I talked with David last week because he's still at Temple Funeral Home. Our brother James is deceased, and I'm still here.
Mm. How have expectations around respect and communication changed over the years in the funeral home
Um,
industry?
It's changed quite a bit, but it's still there. I, I think our society has changed. There's been some benchmarks. When I entered funeral service, I, I think it was in the top 5 category of occupations in a given community. You know, we had the attorney, the doctor, the architect person, and a few other people. But um, even the contractors who worked on my uncle's house, he was friends with them, and I would watch how he built those relationships and how he, managed to keep his bills paid, and that everyone looked up to him. And so I thought I'd develop and kind of just model that. And so my uncle was also in business in Denton for a long time.
Mm. Mm. So even though there have been some changes, it seems like there's some things that are still fundamentally
Oh, they are.
the
They are.
same.
They're fundamental. They're there, and in the community, in the Black community, there are certain standards for everyone. For instance, recently I was in Louisiana 2 weeks ago for a funeral, and someone recognized on the program that I am an ordained clergy person. So
Mhm.
they uh, said, well, instead of you speaking from the side lectern uh, podium, you can come up to the pulpit.
Mm.
There's respect and different things in the community, and I've been able to garner that and have that for a number of years, even in funeral service as such.
Mhm. So I just want to invite listeners, if you have any questions for Zane, please do put them into the chat window. And I want to ask Zane, the you're in Seattle, you're in Washington. That's one of the most unchurched states in the country, and I know that there's a decline in using funerals. Has that changed the way that people look at your work at all?
Actually, it has changed it quite a bit, but as I told someone the other day, um, the word or the term memorial came into being here in the Northwest. And
Mm.
with that, that means a funeral service without the body present. And so, still in the Black community, even if the body's not present, I still call it a funeral because
Mm.
everybody's coming together. We've
Mm.
got the family on one side. We've got the responses, the resolutions from the church. So it's still a funeral as such. We just don't have the body present.
So it doesn't matter if the body is present. There's still that sense of ceremony.
That's right. That's right. And
Mm.
that rite of passage that this person has lived, and now they've passed on, and we have to pay respects.
Mm. What advice would you give to anyone who's aspiring to enter this field, and especially in terms of this work around communication, around relationship building? What advice would you give them?
I'm involved with a nonprofit here in Seattle called the Breakfast Group. And when I first joined the Breakfast Group some years ago, we were attempting to talk about careers in high school. We now are talking to middle school people, hoping to get them to tag on or connect with an occupation earlier in life. It appears that even though it seemed a little out of socket for me to join funeral service so early, it was a great idea because we don't know how long that person is going to live. And two, that the sooner we get them connected, the better. And so, because of that, I think that even that group and others are making connections with persons as they are much younger now than what they were before. And so, that's the whole idea, is to get them connected to a field early. We had tours at Microsoft, Google, and a few other places here in the past year. And it some time ago that would have been for persons who were in high school, but now we're talking about middle school, and
Mhm.
them just taking a look at the occupation, a look at the income, a look at the lifestyle that that person is going to have. And that's what, if someone's interested in funeral service, I would suggest they do. And they would study the background, study what's needed for them to take in terms of college courses, and then enter into the field as young as possible.
Mm.
Mhm.
And I mean, have you ever met someone you're like, oh, who said, oh, I want to do this, and you're like, no, you don't have the right personality type or something like that? Is there any telltale signs of like someone who would not be good in this industry?
I've taken most of the occupational background test,
Mhm.
and most of the actually they came up to me uh, under a program called vocational education test uh, after I got out of the military, and so they came back and said I could become a banker,
Mhm.
I could become possibly an attorney, and maybe there may have been one other occupation. So some of the tests do show persons who would do well in what is called the people business.
Mhm.
So there was a neighbor of mine in Oklahoma City many years ago. She says, "Yeah, don't bother that boy. He's sleeping a lot because he's getting ready for show business." And I would look over and I say, "Man, why is she talking about show business? I'm just going to be at the funeral home." And then later I would call back and say, "You know, she was right. I was having getting ready for show business because every funeral is a different show. Everybody is
Mm.
different, and there's something called what we call." Um, um, not cookie cutter funerals. We have them all set out that they're all going to be the same, but each person is different.
Mhm.
So with that comes the ability to move from one person to another, one family to another, one situation to another. Sometimes the situation is one where um, there has been some violence or something in the background that has caused the person's death. And so that makes up a big difference. For a number of years, I would file claims in Washington for someone being killed through homicide and some through domestic violence. And yet, um, each time my job was to come with sincere compassion to lead them to have a ceremony, have a rite, and at least make peace with themselves about it. As you know, our son passed away now. In fact, this week it'll be 2 years on Thursday. And the Army, who he served in, called me recently and said, "Well, we know that you don't have full peace with losing him so young, but you have to be in somewhat of a good position in that he didn't die from suicide, he didn't die from drugs, and he didn't die from violence.
Mhm.
So he had a medical issue, which we just have to accept that sometimes there are things wrong with us. One of the problems we had with during the COVID time was that you couldn't have any persons with you in the room at the hospital. Even when I took my brother flowers when he was in the hospital,
Mhm.
I have an older brother, 6 years older than me, named Zelman, and I took him flowers, but I could only wave out of the window, "Hi, Zelman," like that, but I couldn't address him, see him, talk to him, and so that made it tough even in the situation with our son because he neglected to go to the hospital because he didn't want to go alone. Being
Mm.
alone is difficult, whether it's now or even in the past. As you know, he passed during the time that we were in COVID.
Mhm.
Everything was all covered. Your face was covered. You couldn't. I have a hearing deficit from the military, and I'd taken the classes on reading lips, and I said, "What do I do now?"
Mhm.
Can't see the person's lips. But yeah, so there we are. We have different things, and I am going to write a book, and I haven't figured out the title yet. But I will say that I'm thinking of a title like if when life throws you a curve, take it.
Mm.
Take the
Mhm.
curve, make the adjustments, and that's what I've been doing. And so that's what I'm still doing now. And you asked me what was I doing right now. I'm
Mhm.
actually preparing myself to be a consultant in funeral service. Um, I'm looking to become active as a practitioner again. One of the certificates that I did complete was a General Manager's Certified Funeral Service Professional, and that program was completed in August of 2022 in Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm looking to take my experience from all the years in actually running a funeral home and put that over to an organization that may want to bring me in for marketing, may want to bring me in for analysis involving their profile of clients, where they could go with that, what they could do, those kind of things.
Well, Zane, I'm so happy that you're not just helping individual families, but also another generation of funeral directors to be able to do this work, to be in the I've never just heard it as described as the showbiz before, and yet it makes so much sense because every show is different because the person you are celebrating is different.
Well,
And
not only that, my one of the things I want to share with you is that my job as a funeral director is to also coach people, and so I'm looking at coaching other funeral directors and practitioners from where they are to what they could become.
Hmm.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Zane, for this conversation. I'm sure our audience really enjoyed learning so much more about this mysterious uh, business of funerals and death and helping people celebrate and have all the memorials as well. So thank you so much, Zane.
You bet. Yes.